they are lying. Finding yourself is much more like waking up on an alien planet, or realizing suddenly that you have been speaking a language you do not understand for 30 years. When you actually start to make contact with your true nature, when the mask begins to slip and the real face underneath starts to breathe, the first sensation is not joy. The first sensation is estrangement. The German philosophers called it unheimlich, the uncanny. The feeling that the familiar has suddenly become strange, grotesque, or wrong. Strange things begin to happen. Your life stops fitting you. The bed you have slept in for a decade feels uncomfortable, as if the mattress is rejecting your skin. The food you used to love turns to ash in your mouth. Your friends' voices start to sound like grating metal, or like loop recordings playing the same predictable scripts over and over again. You look in the mirror and recognize your face, but you don't recognize the person looking back. There's something in the eyes, something that wasn't there before, or maybe it was always there, and you're only now seeing it for the first time. This is not a breakdown. This is not a crisis. This is what happens when an immune system wakes up. Think about what happens when a surgeon transplants an organ into a body, a new heart, a new kidney, something foreign but necessary, something that could save your life. The body's immune system looks at this new organ and it registers one thing: invasion. This is not me. This does not belong, and it attacks. The very thing that could heal you becomes the thing your body tries to destroy. Medical science has a term for this: graft versus host disease. The new organ fights the old body fights the new organ, and in the middle of this war, the person suffers. Fever, inflammation, pain. The body temperature rises. The system goes haywire. Not because something is wrong with the new organ, but because the old system cannot recognize that it needs to change. When you begin to find yourself, when the real you starts to emerge after years of dormancy, your life behaves exactly like a body rejecting a transplant. The new you is incompatible with the old life, and everything that was built to sustain the false self begins to attack the real one. Your job feels suffocating. Conversations with certain people make you physically nauseous. Routines that once brought comfort now feel like imprisonment. You sit in meetings and feel your skin crawl. You go to parties and want to claw your way out of your own body. This is not anxiety. This is rejection. Your soul is rejecting the life that was never meant for it. And here's what nobody tells you about this process. Here's the thing they leave out of the self-help books and the motivational speeches. You cannot negotiate with an immune response. You cannot reason with it. You cannot convince your body to accept poison just because you've gotten used to the taste. The fever has to run its course, and before it breaks, it will burn. I want to tell you about what happens inside a chrysalis, because we love the metaphor of the butterfly. We put it on greeting cards. We tell it to children. We say, go into the cocoon and you'll come out with wings. Beautiful, painless, natural. But we skip the middle part. We skip what biologists call complete metamorphosis. We skip the horror. Inside the chrysalis, the caterpillar does not grow wings. It does not simply add flight to its existing body. What happens is this: the caterpillar releases enzymes that dissolve its own tissues. Its muscles liquefy, its organs break down, its brain melts. Everything that made it a caterpillar turns into a nutrient-rich soup. It dies. Completely. It becomes undifferentiated cellular material floating in its own skin. But in this soup, there are cells that have been dormant since birth. Biologists call them imaginal cells. These are the cells of the butterfly. They've been waiting, and when the caterpillar liquefies, these cells activate. They begin to organize. They begin to build. But here's the part that should terrify you. Here's the part that makes this relevant. At first, the caterpillar's immune system treats the imaginal cells as invaders, as cancer, as something to be destroyed. The dying caterpillar uses its last energy to attack the very cells that will give it wings. There is a war, a cellular civil war. The old self trying to kill the emerging self. And only when the old self is too weak to fight anymore do the imaginal cells win. Only in complete surrender does the butterfly begin. If you cut open a chrysalis in the middle of this process, you won't find a caterpillar with small wings. You'll find soup. You'll find goo. You'll find nothing that resembles either the creature that was or the creature that will be. This is where you are right now. If you feel like you're falling apart, if you feel like you don't know who you are anymore, if you wake up and cannot remember what you wanted, what you believed, what you were supposed to be doing with your life, you are not lost. You are liquefying, and liquefaction is not failure. It is process. It is the necessary dissolution that comes before reorganization. The strange thing is that you cannot see the imaginal cells yet. You cannot see what you're becoming. All you can see is what you're losing. Your ambition evaporates. The things that used to drive you, money, status, approval, suddenly seem absurd, hollow, like toys you've outgrown but forgot to put away. You might spend days staring at walls. You might lose the ability to care about things that once consumed you. People will look at you and say you're depressed. They'll tell you to snap out of it, to get back on track, to remember who you are. But you cannot remember who you are because who you were is dissolving, and who you will be has not yet formed. You are in the soup, and the soup has no shape, no direction, no identity. Most people panic here. Most people are so terrified of this emptiness, so afraid of the formlessness that they try to reconstitute the caterpillar. They take the job they hate. They marry the person they don't love. They rebuild the old structures just to feel solid again, just to have a shape, any shape. And this works, for a while. You can be a zombie caterpillar. You can walk around in the form of your old self, going through motions, hitting marks, playing roles. But you cannot fly. You cannot become what you were meant to become because you refused the dissolution. The chrysalis requires faith in the unseen. It requires trust that the soup will reorganize, that the imaginal cells know what they're doing even when you don't. But let me tell you what nobody mentions about this faith. It doesn't feel like faith. It feels like resignation. It feels like giving up. It feels like letting yourself drown because you're too tired to swim anymore. And maybe that's what it is. Maybe the only way through the chrysalis is to stop fighting, to stop trying to hold the shape of what you were, to let the enzymes do their work, to liquefy completely and trust that something on the other side of nothing will know how to build wings. There's a concept in Tibetan Buddhism called Bardo. It's the intermediate state between death and rebirth. Not the afterlife, not reincarnation, but the space between, the gap, the void where the old self has died, but the new self has not yet taken form. In the Bardo, you are confronted with visions, demons, monsters, wrathful deities. But these aren't external, they're projections of your own mind. The Tibetan Book of the Dead says that if you can recognize these visions as your own creation, you can pass through the Bardo without fear. You can move from death to birth consciously. But if you cling to the old self, if you try to reconstitute what was, you get trapped. You become a hungry ghost, a being with an insatiable appetite for a life that no longer exists, endlessly searching for a home that has been demolished. This is what happens to people who refuse the liquefaction. They become ghosts in their own lives, going through motions, chasing old desires that no longer satisfy, trying to feel things they no longer feel. And the exhaustion of this performance is so immense that it looks like depression, like burnout, like a failure to thrive. But it's not failure. It's refusal. Refusal to let the old self die. Refusal to enter the soup. And that refusal is the only thing keeping you from wings. As your internal structure changes, your external reality begins to warp. And the first place you'll notice this is in your relationships. The people closest to you will start to feel far away, not because they've moved, but because you have. There's a concept in robotics called the Uncanny Valley. When engineers try to create humanoid robots, they discover something strange. If a robot looks 30% human, people find it cute, charming, toy-like. If a robot looks 100% human, indistinguishable from a person, people accept it. But if a robot looks 95% human, almost perfect, but something is slightly off in the eyes, in the movement, people feel revulsion, instinctive horror. The thing that is almost human, but not quite, triggers a primal unease. When you start to change, you enter the uncanny valley for the people who know you. You look the same face, same voice, same mannerisms, but something is different. Something in your energy has shifted. Your frequency has changed. And even though they can't name what's wrong, they feel it. They'll say things like, "You're being distant," or "You've changed," or "You're not yourself." And they'll say these things like accusations, like you've committed a crime, like you owe them the version of you they're comfortable with. What they're really sensing is the death of a role. You used to play a part in their world. The funny one, the responsible one, the person who always said yes, the one who absorbed their complaints and reflected their reality back to them in a way that made them feel stable. And now you've stopped. You didn't announce it. You didn't make a declaration. You just stopped holding up your end of a contract you never signed. I remember a dinner, old friends, people I'd known for years. We're sitting around a table and they're talking about the same things they always talk about. Work drama, relationship problems, complaints about people who aren't there, the usual script. And I'm sitting there and something has shifted. I can hear the words, but I can't connect to them anymore. It's like watching a play where you suddenly notice all the actors are reading from a script. You can see the pages in their hands. You can see them hitting their marks. And you cannot unsee it. Someone turns to me and says, "You're quiet tonight. You okay?" And I say, "Yeah, I'm fine." But I'm not fine. I'm watching people I love perform a ritual I no longer understand. And the distance I feel is so vast that I might as well be on another planet. We're in the same room, but we're not in the same reality anymore. This is the uncanny valley of friendship. You haven't left, but you're no longer the person they're talking to. You're 95% the same, and that 5% is an unbridgeable chasm. And here's the cruelest part. They're not wrong to pull away, because you're not safe anymore. Not in the way you used to be. You used to confirm their worldview. You used to play along. You used to agree that their problems were important and their complaints were justified. And now you can't. Not because you judge them, but because you've stepped out of the shared hallucination. And when one person wakes up in a dream, they become a threat to everyone still sleeping. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote about a sensation he called nausea, not the feeling of wanting to vomit, but a philosophical vertigo, a sudden awareness of the absurdity of existence. He describes looking at the root of a chestnut tree and suddenly seeing it not as a root, a useful category, a named thing, but as a black, bulging, existing thing that has no reason to be there, no purpose, no justification, just existence, raw, contingent, absurd. When you start to change, you begin to experience nausea in your daily life. You go to work and suddenly see a room full of primates in costumes making noises to exchange tokens for shelter. You turn on the news and see fear being sold as information. You look at money and see paper we've collectively agreed to believe in. You go to a wedding and it feels like a performance from an anthropology textbook. You go to a funeral and the grief feels scripted. Everything becomes strange. Not because the world has changed, but because the filter has been removed. You're seeing without the lens of cultural conditioning, without the buffer of collective agreement. And what you see is that almost nothing is natural. Almost everything is performance. Almost everyone is playing a role they didn't choose, but don't know how to leave. Now here's where people get stuck. Here's where the process curdles into bitterness instead of blossoming into freedom. They look at the absurdity of it all and they say, nothing matters. If it's all performance, if it's all arbitrary, if there's no inherent meaning, then why do anything? This is nihilism. This is the trap that Sartre himself fell into at times. The nausea without the exit. But there's a step beyond nihilism, and it requires something that feels impossible when you're in the thick of the uncanny. It requires integrating what you've rejected. It requires meeting the monster. Carl Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." When you begin to peel back the layers of who you thought you were, you find things underneath that you've been taught to hide. Things that good people aren't supposed to have. And the first thing you find, buried deepest, is rage. Not irritation, not frustration. Rage. Ancient. Volcanic. The kind that has been building for years. Decades. Every time you said yes when you meant no. Every time you smiled when you wanted to scream. Every time you absorbed someone else's violence and called it kindness. Every time you betrayed yourself to keep the peace. You find envy. You find greed. You find a capacity for cruelty that terrifies you. You find the part of you that wants to burn it all down. The part that wants to hurt the people who hurt you. The part that doesn't care about being good anymore. This is what Jung called the shadow. The disowned parts of yourself, the aspects you've exiled because they didn't fit the image you wanted to project. And here's what Jung understood that most people miss. You don't get rid of the shadow. You can't kill it. You can only integrate it. Because a person who has never touched their capacity for violence is not virtuous. They're just harmless. And there's a difference. A rabbit doesn't hurt you, not because it's chosen peace, but because it has no claws. A rabbit is not meek. A rabbit is just weak. But a warrior who has claws, who knows how to kill, who has felt the rage and the power and chosen not to use it, that's meekness. That's virtue. Not the absence of teeth, but the choice not to bite. I want to tell you about a moment. A memory that came back to me during this process. I'm 16 years old. There's a kid at school who's been tormenting me for months. Not physically, but with words, with small humiliations. The kind that leave no mark but accumulate into a heavy stone you carry in your chest. One day, he says something in front of a group of people. I don't even remember what it was. But I remember the feeling, the heat rising, the tightness in my jaw, and I remember the thought that flashed through my mind, clear as a voice. I could hurt him. I know exactly what to say. I know exactly how to destroy him in front of everyone. I have the words, and I didn't say them, not because I was virtuous, but because I was afraid. Afraid of being seen as cruel, afraid of becoming the bully, afraid of what it would mean about me if I let that rage out. So I smiled. I laughed it off. I absorbed the humiliation like I'd been trained to do. And I was proud of myself, proud for being the bigger person. But what I didn't realize then, what took me years to understand, is that I didn't integrate the rage. I just buried it. I pushed it down into the basement and told myself I was good. And the rage stayed there, festering, poisoning, leaking out in passive aggression, in self-sabotage, in the chronic tension I carried in my shoulders for years. The shadow doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It just finds other ways out. It becomes the depression you can't explain, the anxiety that has no clear source, the inexplicable exhaustion, the body keeping score of every time you chose silence over truth. Integrating the shadow doesn't mean acting on every impulse. It doesn't mean becoming cruel. It means acknowledging that you have claws, that you have rage, that you're capable of violence, and then choosing, consciously, what to do with that knowledge. When you finally face the shadow, when you let yourself feel the rage without immediately repressing it, something changes. You get heavier. You gain weight that's not physical. You develop a presence. When you walk into a room, people feel something. Not hostility, but solidity, gravity, the sense that you are not someone to be trifled with. And here's the strangest part. The bullies leave. The manipulators move on. The energy vampires find easier prey. Not because you've become aggressive, but because you've stopped emitting the frequency of victimhood. You've stopped signaling that you'll absorb anything to keep the peace. People respect you more even if they like you less, and you stop caring about the difference. There's an alchemical text from the Middle Ages that describes a process called nigredo, the blackening, the putrefaction, the stage where all the base materials rot and decay before they can be transformed into gold. The alchemists knew that you couldn't skip this step. You couldn't go straight from lead to gold. You had to pass through the rot, through the death, through the dissolution. And they said something that's been bothering me for years. They said, the gold is hidden in the dung. What they meant is this: the thing you're most ashamed of, the part of you that you've been trying to hide, the rage, the envy, the cruelty, the selfishness. That's not the obstacle to your transformation. That's the raw material. That's where the gold is buried. You don't become whole by cutting away the dark parts. You become whole by digging through them, by composting the shame into soil, by transmuting the rage into boundaries, by taking the violence you've been directing inward and turning it outward toward the things that deserve to be destroyed. Not people, but patterns, systems, lies, the false self, the roles you were forced into, the expectations you never agreed to. When you integrate the shadow, you stop being nice, and you start being kind, and these are not the same thing. Nice is performance. Nice is fawning. Nice is saying yes when you mean no, because you're afraid of conflict. Kind is honest. Kind sets boundaries. Kind says no when yes would be a betrayal. Kind respects you enough to tell you the truth, even when the truth is uncomfortable. And the world punishes this. The world has trained you to be nice, not kind. Because nice people are easy to control. Nice people absorb violence without retaliating. Nice people prioritize everyone's comfort over their own integrity. But kind people are dangerous. Kind people have integrated their shadow. They know what they're capable of, and they've chosen consciously to direct that capacity toward protection instead of destruction, toward truth instead of performance. This is the second death, the death of the people pleaser, the death of the performance, and it's lonelier than the first death, because when you stop performing, people stop recognizing you, and the distance grows, but something else begins to happen, something subtle at first, then undeniable. After the fever, after the liquefaction, after the shadow work and the social death and the terrible loneliness of becoming, after all of that, there's a shift, a magnetic reversal. Things start to happen that you can't explain. You think of a book you need to read, and the next day, someone hands it to you. You decide to leave your job, and an email arrives that same afternoon with an unexpected opportunity. You walk down a street you never walked down, and you meet someone who will change the trajectory of your life. This is not magic. Or maybe it is magic, but it's the kind that has a mechanism. Jung called it synchronicity, the meaningful coincidence, the alignment of inner and outer reality in ways that transcend causation. Here's the mechanism as best I understand it. Before you found yourself, you were fighting a civil war. One part of you wanted to go left. Another part wanted to go right. One part wanted to speak. Another part wanted to stay silent. One part wanted to leave. Another part wanted to stay. You were a collection of competing desires, conflicting beliefs, unintegrated selves all pulling in different directions. And because of this internal fragmentation, you were standing still. You were cancelling out your own momentum, broadcasting contradictory signals, wanting and not wanting simultaneously. But after the dissolution, after the shadow work, after you've composted the false self and integrated the disowned parts, you become singular. All your vectors point in the same direction. You're no longer at war with yourself. And when this happens, when you stop sabotaging your own intentions, the world becomes responsive in a way it wasn't before. This isn't the secret. This isn't manifestation in the commercial sense. This is physics. This is what happens when you remove the interference pattern. When you stop broadcasting static and start broadcasting a clear signal. Your brain has something called the reticular activating system. It's a network of neurons that filters information. You're bombarded with millions of sensory inputs every second, and your RAS decides what to let through to your conscious awareness and what to ignore. And your RAS is programmed by your beliefs, your intentions, your focus. If you believe you're a victim, your RAS will filter reality to show you evidence of victimhood. If you believe the world is hostile, your RAS will highlight every threat and miss every opportunity. But when you change, when you integrate the shadow and step into your actual self, your RAS reprograms. It starts filtering for different information. It starts showing you the doors that were always there, but you weren't ready to see. This is why opportunity seems to appear after transformation. Not because the universe is rewarding you, but because you're finally able to perceive what was already there. And people change too. The energy vampires fall away because they can't feed on you anymore. You're no longer available for their dramas. You're no longer absorbing their projections. And in their place, different people appear. What I call fellow travelers. People who are also strange. People who are also in process. people who have also been through the chrysalis. You recognize them immediately. There's something in the eyes, a particular quality of awareness. You don't need to perform for them. You don't need to explain yourself. You don't need to justify your strangeness. They're strange too, and the silence between you is not uncomfortable. It's companionable. I met someone like this last year. We were at a gathering, and I saw her standing apart from the group, watching. Not shy, not awkward, just observing. And I knew immediately. I didn't know what I knew, but I knew. We talked for hours, and it wasn't small talk. It wasn't the usual script. It was like we'd skipped the first 10 conversations and gone straight to the real one. And at the end of the night, she said something I'll never forget. She said, "It's rare to meet someone who's been to the underworld." And I knew exactly what she meant. Because you can tell. You can tell who's been dissolved and reformed, who's faced the shadow and survived, who's walked through the Bardo and come out the other side. There's a density to them, a gravity. They're here, fully, not performing, not hiding, just present. These are your people now, not the ones who knew you before, not the ones who want you to be who you were, but the ones who recognize you as you are, the fellow travelers. And this is when you realize that the loneliness wasn't punishment. It was a filter. It was the fire that burned away everyone who was only compatible with your false self. And yes, it hurt. Yes, it was devastating. But it was also necessary, because you can't take everyone with you into the new world. The chrysalis is too small. The process is too intense. Some people will be left behind, not because you're cruel, but because their journey is different. Their timing is different, and trying to drag them with you will only abort your own transformation. There's a moment that happens, and it's impossible to predict when. But after all the dissolution, after all the death, after all the loneliness and the terror and the shadow work, there's a moment where you're alone, completely alone. And for the first time, you're not fighting it. You're sitting in your apartment, or walking in a park, or lying in bed at 3 a.m., and you're alone. And instead of the usual panic, the usual desperate search for distraction, for connection, for someone to fill the void, there's nothing. No panic, no desperation, just silence. And in that silence, you realize something. You're okay, not happy, not fixed, not enlightened, just okay. The solitude that used to feel like death now feels like space. Room to breathe, room to be, room to exist without editing yourself for someone else's comfort. This is what the mystics call kenosis, the emptying, the stripping away of everything until you're left with nothing but essential self. Not the self that performs, not the self that achieves, not the self that earns love through usefulness, just the self that is. And from this emptiness, something grows. Not a new personality, not a new role, but a kind of presence, a rootedness. You stop asking permission. Permission for what? From whom? The other sleepwalkers, the other actors, the people who are still playing the game you've exited. You realize that authority is a fiction, that your boss, the experts, the gurus, the voices telling you how to live, they're all just making it up as they go along, just like you. They don't have a manual you're missing. They don't have access to a truth you don't have. They're improvising, pretending, performing certainty to mask their terror. And when you see this, when you really see it, the pedestal crashes and you're free. Free to make your own choices, free to fail, free to succeed, free to be wrong, free to change your mind, free to live without the constant background radiation of judgment from an audience that doesn't exist. You step into your life like someone inhabiting their own home instead of squatting in someone else's. The world stops feeling like a prison, not because the world changed, but because you did. The bars were always unlocked. You just couldn't see it from inside the cage. And the uncanny feeling, the estrangement, the alienation, the sense of being wrong for the world, it doesn't disappear, but it shifts. It stops being the horror of not belonging, and it becomes something else. The freedom of being ungovernable, the power of being incomprehensible to people who only understand the script. You are strange now, permanently. You've seen too much. You've dissolved too completely. You've integrated too many shadows. You can't go back to playing the game with full sincerity. You can't unsee what you've seen. But here's what I wish someone had told me when I was in the middle of it, when I was liquefying in the chrysalis and convinced I was dying instead of transforming. The strangeness is not a bug. It's the whole point. You were never supposed to fit into the world as it is. You were supposed to break the mold, to step out of the script, to become the thing that makes other people uncomfortable, because you're a reminder that the cage is optional. This is what Nietzsche meant when he wrote about the Übermensch. Not a superhuman, not someone stronger or smarter, but someone who has overcome, someone who has passed through the fire and come out the other side without trying to go back. Someone who creates their own values instead of inheriting them. Someone who says yes to their own becoming, even when it costs them everything. And it will cost you. It has cost you. Friends, relationships, comfort, the easy path. The one where you stayed small and safe and acceptable. That path is gone. The bridge is burned. The door is locked. But on this side of the door, you're awake, alien, strange, ungovernable, and maybe, finally, yourself. If you're in the middle of this now, if you're dissolving, if you're watching your life reject you like a bad transplant, if you're alone and terrified and convinced you've made a terrible mistake, if you're in the soup with no shape and no direction and no idea what you're becoming, I can't tell you it gets easier. I can't tell you there's a finish line. I can't promise you that you'll end up happy or successful or loved. But I can tell you this. On the other side of the dissolution is a kind of freedom that's only available to people who've died once and decided to keep walking. There's a weight, a presence, a groundedness that cannot be shaken because it's not built on anyone's approval. You will never fit in again. Not really. You've tasted something the sleepwalkers haven't tasted. You've been somewhere they haven't been. And you'll spend the rest of your life as a stranger in your own species. But you'll also meet other strangers, other travelers, other people who have been liquefied and reformed. And with them, you won't have to explain. You won't have to justify. You won't have to perform the old role to make them comfortable. You'll just be strange together, free together, awake in a world that's still sleeping. And that's not nothing. That's not emptiness. That's the thing worth losing everything for. The caterpillar dies. The chrysalis cracks. The butterfly emerges. But the butterfly doesn't look back at the caterpillar with nostalgia. It doesn't wish it could crawl again. It doesn't miss the safety of the leaf. It flies. Not because flying is easy, but because it's the only direction left. Strange things happen when you find yourself. Your life rejects you. Your friends become strangers. You liquefy into soup. You face your shadow. You walk through the Bardo. You come out the other side irrevocably changed. And you can never go home. Not to the life you had. Not to the person you were. That door is closed. That version of you is dead. But maybe home was never behind you. Maybe home was always forward, in the strangeness, in the solitude, in the becoming. Maybe the alien planet you woke up on isn't a place you landed. Maybe it's the place you were always supposed to be. And everyone else is the alien. Everyone else is speaking the language you don't understand. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the strangeness is not the problem. Maybe the strangeness is the only real thing you have left. So let it be strange. Let it be uncomfortable. Let it be lonely. Let it burn. Because on the other side of the fire is something that looks like you, but it's not you. Not the you that you were. It's the you that was always underneath. Waiting, patient, immortal. And that version of you doesn't need permission, doesn't need approval, doesn't need to fit. That version of you just needs to be let out. And that's what's happening now. In the soup, in the fire, in the strangeness. You're not breaking down. You're breaking open. And what comes out will be unrecognizable, incomprehensible, strange, and finally, true.